Hey, what's up, guys? John Sin here, and today we have a very important module on one of the most important skills that you're going to learn in order to get good with women, and that's storytelling. Now, really, this is an introduction to storytelling because we are going to come back to storytelling time and time again because there's ways to use storytelling to do a variety of things, from demonstrate attractive qualities to deal with last-minute resistance, etc., etc. So we're going to begin, as I often like to, by talking about why storytelling is important. Storytelling is important because it allows you to basically do at least these 5 important things in attraction. Again, when we're talking about storytelling in this video today, we're really focused on storytelling for attraction. That's where you are right now. That's what we're working on for the next little bit in 12 Months to Mastery and 12 Months to Mastery at Home. So we're really focused on storytelling and attraction. So in attraction, we want to do these 5 things. We want to show the girls who we are. We want to display personality, as Mystery used to call it, or convey personality, or something that sounded kind of weird. Basically, we want to show who we are as a person. We want to give explanations of our personality, ground our personality. And grounding basically means that you're going to give reasons for the way you're going to act. So, for example, I'm fairly arrogant. So I might say something like, I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, which makes me arrogant enough to believe that everyone wants to listen to my opinions. Now, I've grounded arrogance. Or I might like to talk about women a lot. Or I'm kind of girly, so I talk about how I grew up with 3 sisters. You always want to ground your personality so that you can control how you're being perceived. Stories allow you to share information. This is really important, both for demonstrating value, which the old community calls DHVing, but also for the next point, which is relating and bonding. You can share information that you can bond over, that you can relate to other people with, whether it's being from the same town, loving the same restaurant, liking the same sports team, whatever it is. Storytelling allows you to share information, which can lead to bonding and relating, or demonstrating value, demonstrating things like pre-selection, talking about how you have a cute girlfriend or an ex-girlfriend, or demonstrating a sense of adventurousness, etc. All these positive things you can do. And lastly, storytelling allows you to lead a conversation. It allows you to be in control of the conversation and move it where you want it to go and take it to the places and subjects that work for you. So that's really why we want to get good at storytelling and attraction. Later on, storytelling can do things like disarm last-minute resistance. It can do things like frame a girl. It can do things like set up expectations for relationships. It can do a million different things. But for now, we're going to focus just on these 5 important things. Storytelling, like I said before, fits in a lot of places. It's a Swiss Army knife in terms of a tool. It can and should be used throughout the entire interaction. However, a lot of what's been taught about storytelling is wrong, and I personally blame Mystery because he'd sit there and be like, you have to tell stories with these DHV spikes in them about how your ex-girlfriend was dying and you saved her from a gang of guys by smashing in their windows, and just these outrageous things, and people then threw the baby out with the bathwater, as is typical in the seduction community, and said, oh, DHV stories don't work, so storytelling, sitting there and telling stories is bad too. Storytelling is a great skill, but you have to be realistic with your stories, and they have to be well put together and follow the basic structure of storytelling, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. So, what stories are good? The biggest problem guys have when it comes to storytelling is coming up with material. In general, guys either choose stories that are too boring. At one boot camp a couple years ago, I had a student in a storytelling exercise tell me a story about how one time he was supposed to be heading home and he got a layover in Japan, and they let him stay in a hotel, and they had a kimono, and he wore the kimono. So that was his story. That's too boring. Or guys can't come up with anything because they think everything's too boring. You'll have these guys who come in who have really cool stories and really cool lives, and they won't want to talk about it because they'll think it's braggy, or they won't think it's that interesting because it didn't have like a hot girl in the story or something like that. So the first thing I tell most people is you have to lower your idea of what interesting is. Your competition, for the most part, when it comes to meeting girls, is the where are you from, what do you do guy. It's not a really interesting person. So to get you started, here are some ideas you can think of for storytelling material. The weirdest thing that's happened to you or a friend in the last month. The funniest thing that's happened in the last week. Or the most adventurous thing you've done in the last year. Funny, adventurous, weird, entertaining, silly, off the wall. These are stories that you want to tell in attraction. In attraction, our energy, our postures, our voice tone is going to be more playful, more over the top, more outlandish almost, because you need to stand out. As you move forward in the interaction, you can tone all that stuff down. But in the beginning, we want good, entertaining, funny, or cute or interesting stories, and we'll talk about all of that later. So, the structure of a story. The most basic storytelling structure, going all the way back to Greek and Roman times, is a beginning, a conflict, and a resolution. So keep this in mind. Every story you tell needs to have a beginning, a setup, a conflict, something that happens or is about to happen or could potentially happen with negative consequences, and then a resolution. That is the structure of a story. It's not a story if nothing happens. It's not a story if you met a girl and just got laid. That's another mistake guys tend to make in this storytelling exercises. They'll be like, one time I went to the grocery store and I was talking to this girl and we ended up having sex like 2 weeks later. That was really cool. I'm like, yeah, you can't tell a story about that to girls. Other things to avoid are traveling stories too early on. They're not a bad idea if you can work them in easily, but for the most part, you don't want to force them. What else? Anything gross is another thing to keep out. Girls just are more emotional, so they experience things more graphically. Anything that's overly braggy, like I was driving my Lamborghini, and you want to keep out. Another thing to keep in mind is you want to start with the end of your story in mind. And in attraction, stories are going to end on a laugh, on a, "aw, that's cute," on a, "that's interesting," or "that's cool," or on a follow-up question. If you're getting anything other than those 4 responses when you're telling stories, there's something wrong with your story, or there's something really wrong with your delivery. So again, a laugh, an "aw, that's cute," or a "oh," but like basically something to like a cute ooh cooing sort of noise. That's interesting or that's cool, basically for intriguing or interesting material, or a follow-up question. The other thing you need to keep in mind after you have your ending, because the ending is important because you want people to know when the story is over so that it signals it's their turn to talk, so that it allows you to move forward and stuff like that. The worst thing that ever consistently happened to me was I had a couple of stories very early on, like 7.5 years ago probably, and I would tell them and girls would be like, "and then what happened?" And so I learned that lesson very early on, that you want to have a strong ending first. The second thing is you need to have a lead-in to your story. You don't want to just bust out the story. Like, nothing's weirder than when you're talking to someone and they're like, "So the other day I'm driving down the street." I'm like, "How'd we get here?" And it just makes me check out. And I've seen it happen with girls as well. So you want to lead in. And you lead in with any sort of transition. But just to review a couple, you can lead in with a cold read. Like, "Oh my God, you totally remind me of my friend Sally. I was talking to her yesterday and she said," you can lead in with an observation and be like, "Oh, that scarf totally reminds me of like fall in New York, like last year when I was still living there. Or I can lead in with a hook question, like, you ever been to the Hollywood sign? Okay, check this out. But the point is, you need to have a lead in. Lead in and ending are the two most important parts to actually social skills of storytelling. So you want to have a really strong lead in and a really strong ending, and then you can fill in everything else. Another little piece of advice: characters make stories. So you want to focus a lot on your characters. Like, I talk about my brother. My brother is like 6'4" and has really long hair and dresses like the Crow. He paints his face white and wears like a lot of leather and black, and he dates really big buff black men. And him and his boyfriend Marcus, who he's been with for like 10 years, often appear in my stories about my family. And his boyfriend Marcus is like as big as a refrigerator and like talks in the softest voice you've ever heard in your life. He's like, "Hi, John, nice to see you again." It's very, very strange, but with an English accent. So those are characters, and your character should have descriptions. Like, you notice when I describe my brother, I give a physical description, as well as make it really vivid. I tell you what he wears. I tell you how tall he is. I don't think I mentioned that he moves kind of like a spider, which is something I also usually throw in. But the more vivid you make your characters, the more people understand your characters, the better your stories will be. In another one of my stories, I talk about my friend Ernie, and Ernie is a liar. And he steals. He's a cool guy, but like he's a liar, and like he'll steal from people he doesn't know. So I'll like describe Ernie, and Ernie kind of looks like the Fonz if the Fonz were like Hispanic. He's got like a slick back, like pompadour hair, and he still dresses like it's the 50s. And he'll tell you lies for no reason. Like, one time we were driving next to him on the freeway, and me and my friend Anthony called him, and we were like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he was like, "I'm brushing my teeth right now." And we were like, "Asshole, no, you're not. You're driving on the 101. We can see you." Again, Ernie. So the more you can make these characters descriptive, what do they look like? Give them voices. When I talked about my brother's boyfriend, he's big as like a refrigerator. The more you don't need to give accurate portrayals of what the people actually are like. Obviously, like, my brother is more than just a spidery dude who likes big black guys. But you're not. This is storytelling for attraction, not storytelling for the Nobel Peace Prize for journalism and accuracy. We want to make this entertaining. So again, voices, posture. Sometimes I'll even put my hands out when I say my brother's boyfriend is like as big as a refrigerator, to like give a scale of size. I'll do the same thing when I'm talking about height. If someone's tall or short or fat or thin, you want to have these character postures. All this stuff makes your stories 10 times more entertaining. And they really work a lot better. And the last thing is, make sure you use check-ins. As you're telling a story, you never want to let the people go 100% into receive mode. You don't want to be lecturing to them or like doing an improv or comic performance, because that's how you become a little bit of a dancing monkey. So instead, you want to use check-ins. So I might be telling a story and then be like, have you ever met someone like this? And check-ins are just questions related to the story that just require yes or no answers. They prompt for a little tiny bit of input to keep people from going 100% into receive mode. All right, next thing I want to talk about is story length. In attraction, your story should range from 30 to 90 seconds and not be much longer than that. Here's another thing I blame Mystery for. If you watch Mystery's DVDs or have ever seen him talk and he starts telling his attraction stories about smashing windows, they're like 5 minutes long. I think the shortest one is like 2.5 minutes long. And Mystery can pull those off because he's very charismatic and he has good delivery and he's got a strong frame and he's used to people, not really paying attention when he talks. Most guys do not have all of those assets necessary to keep people's attention for 2.5 minutes, and people are just going to drift off, or they're going to be like, you know what, we have to go to the bathroom, or they're going to tool you, and it's not going to work very well. So keep your attraction stories to no more than 90 seconds. 90 seconds is a long, long time. If you've ever done stand-up comedy or improv or anything like that where you had to talk and fill 90 seconds to 2 minutes. It's not a short amount of time. So it's more than enough to get through every story. Do not tell these long-winded stories, because you don't want to risk boring the girl or the group and having them want to get away from you, or just them not believing you, or them just thinking that it's weird that you're monopolizing the conversation so much. And again, like I said before, stories and attraction generally end on a laugh, an awe, that's cute, or that's interesting, or also a follow-up question. All right, let's get into the real purpose of this video. This video really was to introduce storytelling, give you some basics, which I just did, and now to help you mine your life for stories so that you can create your own stories. But not only can you create your own stories, but I'm giving you the process that I used starting 5 or 6 years ago when I first took a storytelling workshop, which was very expensive, and now, to this day, when I have new stories, I put them through this process, and this process will be how you create your own material from your life for the rest of your life. If you ever have a new experience, or you think, or you remember something, and you're like, oh wow, I think I'd really like to talk to girls about that, you can sit down, put it through this process, and get a really good, really attraction-based story from this process consistently forever. So it's really kind of like a teach a man to fish situation. I could have given you, 5 or 10 of my stories like a lot of other guys do, and you would have been able to go out and use those and eventually get good at them and eventually get bored of them and they wouldn't work anymore. But instead, I want to teach you to develop your own stories, and through that process, you'll be able to do this. And I used to do this on my boot camps all the time. And it takes like 2 hours. Like, it's a pretty long exercise. So I'm going to lay it out for you here, and then I want you guys to do it today or within the next week or so. First thing you want to do, sit down with a timer for 30 minutes and develop a 5 W's or 2-sentence description of every story you could potentially tell girls. So this is just your brainstorming. And the 5 W's, for people who don't know, are who, what, where, when, and why. So if you were in college and you guys stole the other college's mascot, write it down. If you and a girlfriend tried to have a threesome and it went horribly wrong, write it down. If you and your buddies went out one night and ended up partying with a guy who ended up being famous, write it down. If you and your friends at work staged like an elaborate practical joke, write it down. Everything you can in either a 2-sentence description or 5 W's. Just write as many of these down as possible. The more of these you have, the more we can edit, and the more you'll be able to have a lot of choices. A lot of them aren't going to be good. We don't need 100% of these to be good. You don't need to always have 100% good ideas. All you need to do is whittle them down. All right, now, once you've done that, after you've spent 30 full minutes, don't spend less time. Even if you have like 20 ideas in the first 5 minutes, spend 30 full minutes. You need to get all these ideas out of your brain. Get everything out of there. It's a very important part of the process. Now, we're going to go through this list and pick the 3 best ideas. So, pick the 3 best. Try to pick the stories that you want to tell the most, or the stories you think are the most entertaining, not necessarily the stories that make you look the best. A lot of these guys in this exercise, they tell a lot of stories about ex-girlfriends and stuff like that because they think, again, because of mystery, that you have to have pre-selection and all these other things in every single story you tell. And while pre-selection's not necessary, it's not necessary in every story. Not every story has to be about how you're good with girls, or about how you're the man, or about how you're a leader, etc., etc. So don't get caught in that mindset thinking that everything has to be filtered through attraction. It's better to have a good story that doesn't have any attractive qualities about it. You can always put them in, than it is to have a bad story that happens to make you look attractive. All right, so with these 3 stories, what we're going to do now is take another 30 minutes, and write each one out in a full paragraph format. Paragraph, a page. If you can get a page, that's great, but at least a paragraph. Like, write it out in as much detail as you possibly can. Each one should take you about 10 minutes. Again, don't spare the details. Think about what you saw, what you heard, what you thought, what you felt, what you touched, what you tasted, what you smelled. Sensory information is a big part of storytelling, especially for women. But again, don't make it gross. But what were you thinking? Inner dialogues can be important in storytelling. If I'm telling a story about how I am limping because I got kicked in the leg by a professional kickboxer like for 20 minutes earlier in the day, that story could be braggy if I don't add the inner dialogue that I was really scared, right? Like, it says that I fight with professional fighters and it makes me look really good, but if I don't add the inner dialogue that I was scared, it's kind of hard to relate to, and it could seem like I'm trying to brag. So don't be afraid to pick inner dialogues, especially if your stories are extreme. Like, if you have stories that are like about you street losing or something. Don't do extreme sports either. Those are weird things that girls don't relate to. Keep it to things that are focused on relationships, animals, your family, your close friends, embarrassing moments, awkward situations, funny social situations. Keep them more social based than kind of ranging into anything you want to talk about. In attraction, once you're in comfort and seduction, you can talk about almost anything. All right, so you've now written out your 3 stories. Once you have your 3 stories, you're going to pick your final one to work on. And this should be the one that you like the most, that you are the most comfortable with, that you think is the most interesting, that you think girls would like the most, etc. So you pick the final one to work on. Now you're going to get a tape recorder, and you're going to record yourself telling this story in 3 different versions, 3 different times. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to tell a 30-second version. For the most part, the first time you probably aren't going to get through your full story. Don't just read it off the paragraph. Try to put it into your own words. Think about it, what it's like when you speak it. Think about putting good delivery into it, saying it in a slow, clear voice, even though you're trying to get through it in 30 seconds. Once you finally get your full story crammed into 30 seconds, which could take 6 to 10 times, depending, which is why this exercise can take up to 2 hours, because this part takes a long time. Once you get your 30-second version, then you're going to move on to a 60-second version. And your 60-second version, again, now is just going to be 1 full minute. So this may feel like a lot of time directly after the 30-second version. It may still feel like not enough time, depending on your story. And again, if you don't fill all 60 seconds, if you're done in 54 seconds, do it again. You need to have exactly 60 seconds. This is important because this is the refinement process. By forcing you to deliver and perform the story in set amounts of time, we're teaching you how to, quote-unquote, riff, how to make stories longer if they need to be longer, shorter if they need to be shorter, way longer if they need to be longer, etc., etc. That's a really invaluable skill because it's basically the art of bullshitting. And you can learn this art. The people who are really gifted socially can take a 20-second blurb and turn it into a 10-minute TV feature. And that's a part of what you need to learn to do. So getting it to exactly 60 seconds is important. And then a 90-second version that will feel long, especially since you've just been cramming these into 30 and 60 seconds. But the 90-second version is your chance to really experiment with that sensory imagery, to really get into the senses, to really get into the emotions of the story, to really get into what you are feeling, to really get into the details, the little tiny things that are funny or interesting or make you look better, or are open loops, or are cold reads, or stuff like that. Like 90 seconds gives you a lot of time to do stuff. And again, repeat this process until you have a comfortable version. One of these versions is going to feel right to you. It's probably going to be the 60-second version, judging from hundreds and hundreds of boot camps. But but it may be the 90-second version, it may be the 30-second version, depending on your story. You're going to find one that feels right, and that is going to be your customized story. Now, obviously, if you need a couple more seconds than 60 or a couple less seconds than 90, don't feel weird about altering your final version, as long as you've done the exercise. But this exercise is invaluable in learning to riff and also in fixing your story, because the time differences make you focus on what the spine of your story is. In 30 seconds, you're basically just getting through the bare basics someone needs to get to understand the situation. In 60 seconds, you have a little bit of time for elaboration, but not a ton. You're not going to be getting into super details. You're not going to be getting too much into deep character postures or background information on the characters. In 90 seconds, you have time. 90 seconds, you have time to explain everything, to get into very meticulous details if the story needs it. And the story may not need it. That's what you may learn as you do your 90-second version. So this is a really, really powerful exercise for attraction, and it's something that you can use for the rest of your life, for anything, work presentations, stuff like that. There's a lot of value in this sort of process. Okay. So there is a lot more you can do with storytelling once you get into qualification, comfort, etc., and we will periodically come back to the storytelling process throughout the year. But for now, you have a process to create as many attraction stories as you need, as well as a basic understanding of the storytelling process, specifically the storytelling process in attraction. If you need more material for stories, go back to your list of 10 things you like to talk about and look for stories related to that. Look for 10 things that you like, that you're interested in, that you know girls like. Look for stories there, etc., etc. You shouldn't have a problem coming up with material, no matter how boring your life is. There's a lot of stuff out there. Okay, next week we're going to be covering the cocky and playful or cocky and funny attitude, as well as the idea of attraction amplification, which is a really, really key concept to understanding attraction and differentiating attraction material that generates attraction from attraction material that simply amplifies attraction that's already there. Which can be the difference between being successful and not. So a lot of stuff to continue and a lot of stuff to come next week. Talk to you then.